Hello everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, whenever you decided to tune into this video, welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about racism in the healthcare field and how it's a detriment to Black women's health. My name is Amya Harris. This is for my senior seminar psychology class. I have a presentation that I'm going to be showing you guys. You're going to hear my voice as the presentation is going, and we're going to have a closing at the end, and I'm going to come back. You can see my face, and that's going to be the project, so please enjoy. Alright, so this is going to be the breakdown. I'm going to be talking about socio-historical factors, understanding double consciousness, stereotyping, inner strength, and socio-economic factors. Then I'm going to break down institutionalized, unchecked racism, the COVID-19 impact on Black women's health, the gaps in literature that I found as I did my own research, future direction that we should go, and action that we should take. The last page is going to be my references. So this is my thesis statement. Black women are mistreated and discriminated against by the United States healthcare system because of three things. 1. Corporate embedded racism. 2. Encouraged ignorance. And 3. The consistent disenfranchisement enacted upon Black people. Alright, literature review slide 1. So, before I get into it, let me just tell you a little bit about socio-historical. So, the meaning of that is just the relationship between social history, or you can look at it as social historical factors that play a role in Black women's lives, as I'll be speaking about it today. And I bring this up because for as long as Black women have been in America, we have been neglected and treated based off of prejudices and negative implicit or explicit ideals. It has been found that Black women have to operate on a very individual sensation of feeling as though your identity is divided into several parts, which internally makes it difficult to have a sense of self. This double consciousness comes from African Americans experiencing racialized oppression for centuries in a white-dominated society. It is really the feeling of knowing that you're always going to be treated differently from others. The feeling of really like a dark veil covering over you, representing being American and Black holds certain connotations, and you're always trying to merge both selves to make a truer self, but you have to understand that no matter how many years have passed, we haven't really found or truly felt a sense of freedom. You can't combine those two without that. Now, something that wasn't really discussed too much in the literature that I read, which I do want to bring up more, which had some disagreements on it, was a triple consciousness. The reality for Black women is we don't have a double consciousness. We have a triple consciousness. A triple consciousness of not only being American, but being Black and being a woman. Two of those categories have been minorities for centuries and oppressed for centuries, based off of white supremacy and Black hypermasculinity that play a role in marginalizing Black female voices and prioritizing white female voices beyond feminism that is non-intersectional. So, in turn, Black women had to carry that kind of socio-historical factor with them, and once again had to find inner strength and recreate their own realities. Alice Walker coined the term womanism, which is a form of feminism that emphasizes women of color's natural contribution to society, which was ignored for many years. Other women began to organize their own identities on their own terms to match an existential reconnection with their past, such as through Black feminism and the inclusivity of intersectional feminism, which is something that I like to identify myself with today. Alright, great. So now that you have an understanding of that, let's get into the literature review part 2, where I'm going to be talking about inner strength, stereotyping, and socioeconomic factors, and how each of those play a role in Black women's lives today. So let's begin with inner strength. This is a very important theme that I came across a lot during my research, which is the reflection of socio-historical factors, gender discrimination, stereotypes, and societal norms that were set in place for Black women to obey. The importance of understanding this is it gives perspective on how this is embedded racism and how it stems from Black women having to constantly put up emotional and physical armor on the daily in order to survive in America. We are expected to be independent and supportive to others, but not allowed to voice how it makes us feel. Otherwise, we are stereotyped as an angry Black woman and silenced. Next, we have stereotyping, which I'm going to dig more into as I kind of led it on in the last topic. there are a lot of blatantly hurtful and dishonest representations of the Black woman in America that force Black women to navigate through a crooked society that shames them and forcibly shapes their experiences as citizens. Many Black women will respond by assuming a mantle of strength that may convince others and even themselves that they don't need help, even when they really do. Unfortunately, as a result, the unique political issues of Black women are often ignored and marginalized. In the aftermath of slavery, there have been a lot of resulting social, economic, and political effects that have shown detrimental effects on Black women. They've become victims of negative stereotyping in mainstream American culture, such as stereotypes like the myth of the angry Black woman that I talked to you before, that characterizes women as aggressive, ill-tempered, illogical, overbearing, hostile, and ignorant without, being provoked. And alongside the political effects of prejudice and racism, this helps explain the stigmas created for Black women that some healthcare professionals carry, which in turn turns Black women away from hospitals and, more importantly, reviewing medical preventative support as being unattainable or not helpful. This is part of the socioeconomic section, and this statement really drives home my point about African American women and their mistreatment. African American women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from childbirth than non-Hispanic or white women. And socioeconomic status, fame, education, higher education, and other factors do not protect Black women against this disparity. Instead, sexism and racism are the primary drivers. Such disparities have a high number of dimensions. A main area for reform is the current structure and function of the healthcare system. Okay, now that we've talked about that, let's get into the literature review slide 3, which I talk about institutionalized unchecked racism, which we kind of brought up a little bit in the last slide. And then I'm going to be talking about COVID-19's impact on Black women today. So as far as unchecked institutionalized racism, through this research, I have found that there have been many assessments given to healthcare providers that show there's a systematic disadvantage because of interpersonal racism. Now, these studies were conducted in the U.S. and mainly focused on the physicians, but there have been significantly evident racist beliefs, emotions, and practices among healthcare providers against minorities. 26 out of 37 cases, that is a shocking 70%, by the way, have been acted on upon racial bias. This affects the sexual and reproductive health of African American women. It's been compromised due to this lack of accountability and care. This is important and constantly overlooked due to people not believing our healthcare system is corrupt or just not caring at all. These problems are caused by systematic oppression that would need solutions from an equally systematic standpoint, driven by economic investments, higher up decision making that expands the institutional racism, which is a critical social determinant of health. There's a very strong link between racism and health as a matter of life and death. There are 2 ways you can look at racism in this case. 1, racism can be seen as underemployment in the Black community that disproportionately affects minorities who, as a result, don't have access to healthcare insurance. Or you can also look at racism like healthcare institutions being filled with white middle-class patients, while Black families have to have city hospitals well known for indigent care. The embedded racism layers are very complex, and the encouraged ignorance comes from the provider biases happening consistently and continually unchecked by the healthcare institutions. As far as COVID-19 impact, we live in a system that prioritizes the values and needs of the majority while ignoring not caring to fully recognize the needs of the minorities. The differences include life expectancy, health outcomes based on race and care. Another very misfortunate case in point about the COVID-19 debacle is that we're facing a global pandemic that's been compared to the societal effect of the Spanish flu, and yet our government and healthcare corporations still are not budging to support Black women or Black families. In Chicago alone, more than 50% of COVID-19 cases, almost 70% of the deaths are African American. In Louisiana, where African Americans represent 32.3% of the state's populations of families, over 70.5% of deaths have been among Black people. Black women living with a lower socioeconomic status, even though we talked earlier about how SES doesn't really have an impact because higher SES you still get treated with racial biases, regardless of the fact of that, you have to also understand that having a lower SES means you don't likely have access to healthcare facilities or healthcare insurance, and you're being turned away and not being able to protect yourself or your family. Our government should be offering better advice and support to lower SES Black families regarding prevention, burdens on poor health, limited access to food, housing density, the inability to stop working and practice social distancing, bills still racking up, and the potential of being put out on the streets. But instead, we're getting nothing. Gaps in the literature. So I brought up these points before, but I'm just going to summarize them one more time. The first part is that Black women do not live in a double conscious world. They live in a triple conscious world. And all of the connotations, the racism and discrimination that comes with being American, Black, or a woman, all play a part in how they see the world today in their triple conscious world. The second point is that the reality of having a higher socioeconomic status does not save Black women from discrimination or racial bias. It doesn't matter if you're famous or have higher education or have more money. There is still a high chance that you will suffer discrimination from medical professionals because of their own embedded racism. Third point, COVID-19 is impacting Black and Brown communities the hardest because of the lack of support and care from healthcare professionals and our system filled with institutionally embedded racism. And the last point is that Black women with lower socioeconomic status are suffering with little to no support. All right, so second to last page is about future direction. So should someone continue to do research on this and they want to figure out how to broaden their research, I put together 3 little points. The first one is addressing the racial disparities and not ignoring them. That is so important. But the question is really how? Promoting health and safety to racial ethnic groups is really big, but does that come from the government? Does that come from community? Does that come from healthcare professionals and providers, getting people healthcare professionals and providers? That's something that they can study and go into. Another point is targeting and correcting maternal deaths, mortality rates. That's huge. That is, it's killing a lot of Black women and women of color, and that's something that definitely needs to be tackled. So those are my 3 directions for that. And the last thing I have is my references page, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Again, my name is Amia Harris. Thank you for watching my video. This is for my senior seminar psychology course, and I hope you learned something today. Have a good one.